The fourth volume, which was released on July 22nd, 1999, is a set that doesn't really change much about the formula. You got a few new monsters, spells, no traps. So yeah, the last episode was more an anomaly for the moment rather than a bold new direction for the card game. You got more monsters to replace the weaker monsters, but between this and the following booster, Yu-Gi-Oh! Would reach its initial peak of power creep on its normal beatdown deck that was arguably the best strategy of the early game. And in the later free packs, we would see a move towards new strategies that would become prevalent and phase out the old beatdown strategies. So Volume 4 is kind of in this weird place of being in between potent sets, but within Volume 4 is not only the strongest tribute of the game, but also a way to turn a set of 3 of your favorite power spells into potentially 4 or even 6 copies of your spell. So let us dive into the 4th volume. First up is, well, Yugi's first monster we ever summoned in his duel against Kyra, the Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress #1, or just Fortress Protecting Dragon. The slightly superior older brother of the Wyvern swoops down onto you. Even though the anime and manga just gave him the standard generic fireball attack that you can expect to dragons, I don't know, maybe they thought since this was a wind monster it made more sense to have a fireball. Anyway, this is fine, which you're going to hear a lot from this set. 1400 attack and 1200 defense. It just has the issue that in a month, well, there's going to be a whole lot more powerful monsters that just erases everything else from the deck aside from maybe a few 1600 and 1500 beaters. But hey, let's give a round of applause to one of the OG monsters, even though his use was rather uneventful. And after that, we have the right leg of the Forbidden One. Like its previous two parts, it isn't doing much, but soon the Forbidden/Sealed One would be awakening from its slumber to obliterate all foes. But before he became arguably the best monster of the OCG, wait later for more details as to why that was the case, here is the actual initial best monster of Series 1. The cream of the crop for Series 1 tribute summons, a monster until the introduction of effect monsters that would have given tribute some worthwhile effects. Summon Skull, or Daemons or Demon Summon, came in with 2500 attack points. This was just a Dark Magician for just one tribute. Yeah, its defense was not great, but who was going to stop this? Yeah, but monster-wise, there is this thing called not pulling him, but this demon, to when he was initially introduced, did look sort of demonic with the purplish flesh, later getting redesigned that made it look more skeletal. Claims to confuse foes before defeating its opponent with strong force, which was lately lightning since that was its main attack. It's not only an iconic card, but it was also worth running for such a long time. You only had to replace one monster instead of the two with Dark Magician or Blue Eye, so it was less of an investment in order to put it out, beating Yugi's other single monster tribute, Curse of Dragons. Neat. Essentially, this was another card to continue getting support, though it was more associated with the Archfiend archetype, with later printings counting it as an Archfiend, since it could get used by one of GX's early antagonists, Titan. I guess it makes sense, since after a while Yugi stopped using it for some reason and chose to focus more on Dark Magician and its support in anime. Could you imagine a world where instead of Dark Magician, his ace was Summon Skull? Maybe the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! Would have still stayed a lot darker if that was the case. The first evolution of the Rock Ogre Grotto, or the Grotto Gen, Ogre Rock, claims to be protected by solid rock and throws some bone-shattering punches with its thick arms. Sadly, this set includes a different golem with strong arms that boasts stronger attack. What you get is a melee defender that if you squint hard enough, you could think it was a mystical elf or spirit of the harp. So we'll just have to wait to become the Rock Grotto #2 or evolve into its steel counterpart. While not the Great White or the Beheading Beauty, the Armored Glue still was a decent attack stat to include in a deck for its vicious bite. Kinda wish you tried to mention mauling opponents because those claws as well were looking pretty insane as well. This was an old Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster. A nice amount of terrifying terror in the card behind some kind of cool color gradient. And we go from classic to iconic. The Harpy Lady. Likely to have awakening for a lot of people, especially when they realized the card in Japan just got a slink bikini for its top wall in the West. She was given a way to cover it with a bodysuit, and it was perfectly fine. A rubber balanced stat spread that could defend combined with the cyber bondage could make a monster that hit decently hard. But there was more to the hard ability, as there were more cards that could support it. Yes, this was arguably our first support targeted towards a single monster rather than just attributes with the field spells. There was a spell card, Elegant Egotist, or Kaleidoscope Elegant Doppelgangers, that could either summon out another Harpy Lady or bring out the Harpy Lady sisters. So they're not doppelgangers just inviting the sisters? Why is it I can see why they more or less didn't choose to call it doppelganger. It's neat, but sadly runs into a problem that was going to face a lot of these neat combos early game I brought up with Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth. Not only do you need to have a Harpy on the field, but also the spell in hand, and have gotten these sisters as a free specific card combo for a payout that was not particularly great. A combo that could barely beat a Cursed Dragon without the Cyber Gear, but why do that when for a single monster you could get out the 25,000 Summon Skull for far less effort, or later when decks really did not care about summoning a big bungus monster to beat in. And of course Harpy would become a deck of its own that, though considering how the Harpy archetype would end up growing when Konami started to farm nostalgia, but that's still years off, so now it's just going to be these girls. And a brother they were completely ignoring their pet dragon. Koji Koshi. Kasi confuses me on a couple of levels. So in the OCG, this card is simply Monster Hunter. So, hunts monsters, right? Well, in text, in both, they're described as Manhunter. So, does he hunt men or monsters? I guess the only thing that makes sense is the fact that its arms are very powerful to crush boulders. Noticing a trend of arms and boulders in this set so far. But also the name. I think for the moment it's just a name they gave it to try and differentiate it from a lot of the other warriors that were out. Because it is another example of I look up the name and I just get the card. I don't know, maybe it is a word for a hunter in some part of the world, or it's made up name for a monster that's pretty okay for a normal summon in Volume 4. Petite Moth and Cocoon of Evolution are very much an example of a pair of cards you likely would not see without the other, seeing as how they work in tandem. Get the Petite Moth onto the field, face up, equip the Cocoon of Evolution to it to increase its defense to 22,000, and sit there for currently 6 turns to summon out the Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth. Unless you didn't get the Dual Monsters 2 game, or ended up getting it after they had stopped putting cards into it, like maybe it was a used copy, you basically were just getting a slightly more complicated Defender until Volume 6 when the inferior Great Moth came out. And again, I went over all the issues with this, but again, 6 turns! In that time, you could summon a monster for decent stat to keep around for a turn, and then tribute it for a Summon Skull or Cursed Dragons. 8,000 points less, but you didn't have to wait 6 turns to get Raigeki or Dark Hole. And trust me, BS super bosses that are cool are going to be in supply for a while. You know, very few monsters can claim they would become stronger once dead, but Crawling Dragon can say that it gets better in depth and in life. Yes, we have not talked about Dragons only, but there is not much to talk about here. Tribute monster with the same stats as a Great Wife and don't know why I keep saying wife. Great White and Beautiful Headhuntress, a dragon that can't fly but is still powerful. Yes, there's the fact for me being a dumbass kid who thought this monster was really good in Eternal Duelist Soul, despite the fact that it was not Summon Skull, which you had a chance to get in your starter deck and was way better. Next up, we have another pair. This actually might help me get through this set faster before we get to actually me just grouping a bunch of monsters together for archetypes. But we have 2 flip monsters that grant you effectively an additional copy of a trap, or more importantly a spell card, as they grab one that has already been used in the graveyard. Mask of Darkness, I guess, marked the spot where an old trap was buried for you to reset, though it is right now a bit more niche considering that the traps you may want an additional copy for are limited, It's going to be that 4th trap pulse, so to set your opponent up to think that more or less they've gotten rid of it through Heartbeat Sever Duster to be able to summon their strongest monster, or a second copy, unless your mom or dad, and yourself if you're an adult having the big bucks to get free copies by buying the game multiple times or getting in on the singles market, Kunai with Chain. It's nice, but when we compare it to its spell counterpart, the Saint Magician of Faith, it's almost impossible to pick. Do I want an additional copy of Raigeki, Dark Hole, Pot of Greed, Swords of Revealing Light, Monster Reborn, and we still haven't gotten all of the crazy spells from early on in the game that most 2000 kids would recognize. It is hands down the most important card in this set, beating out Summon Skull. Which, yes, it was the definitive boss, but think about it. A 4th or potentially 5th and 6th copy of your power spell. There's no beating that. While Mask of Darkness would only at most be limited, 7 years after its introduction, Mission of Wraith also surprisingly did not get an immediate limitation or even a ban. Yeah, in the OCG, both cards got hit in the March 2006 list. Mask of Darkness got limited while Magician of Faith only got semi-limited. The TCG hit Magician of Fate a bit harder a year earlier in the wake of the end of the GOAT format and the rise of Cyber Dragon when they hit a lot of key GOAT cards. But after that, it would alternate between being limited and banned till 2014 in the TCG and 2016 in the OCG. Just flip monsters fell out of favor. Power creep just happened, and the game got faster that no one really thought that setting a monster to potentially get a power spell back would be worthwhile. Maybe the reason it took so long to actually hit on the list was, well, we're limiting other power spells and by extension traps. This card literally is not good if it cannot get those specific spells and trap cards, but as the list grew, it kind of was hard to ignore the fact that this was probably the big main problem of all 3 decks, and it was better to limit until it really was not that powerful. Doma, the Silent Angel of Death. Or a fairy, because they count it as a fairy since they don't have an angelic or holy type, is another ruler over death. So once you see them, you are cooked. I guess it's more a, hey, something is going to kill you because I feel death would be a little more powerful. And also it gets even weaker in darkness because, hey, remember Yami? I know the field spells are not great, but hey, this monster, despite looking like it would be good in Yami, is not because Yami decreases the power of fairies. I think this poor guy ends up embarrassed when his fellow Reapers talk about it with him, how in darkness he's actually weaker and he just has to drink his sorrows away after that. And continuing in the realm of death, and one of the TCG changes I just can't understand when they brought this card stateside, that they made it so he's not pointing anymore. I guess it was a very evocative pointing that was too hardcore for us kids. Doku Roizor the Grim Reaper brings doom and steals soul with hellish blows. Despite supposedly being, the Grim Reaper, Harbinger of Death, Stealer of Souls, it has only 900 attack. That is disappointing for a being that causes death, but then again, he's a messenger of death, not bringer, so he probably just comes to claim them when the other people have killed them. More Deathbringers with the Dark Assailant / Assassin, wielding the Psycho Sword. So is it just one sword that has the Psycho Sword, or does he have 2 Psycho Swords? It also has some Psycho kunais in his hands, with which it rules the Badlands or Demon World. Only really a very small portion of it. Daemon Summon is there to remind him who currently rules over the Demon World. It's not his 1200 attack and defense with his Psycho Swords. That's the most middle-of-the-road monster in a set that has plenty of other monsters worth using. It is just a set before the biggest power creep of normal summon up to this point. So, Water Omotics Dancer, I guess either as a reference to osmosis or just a corruption of the original Japanese word for dancer, doesn't focus on dance battling to fight enemies, rather she has a jar that can make water dragons. You may have noticed, unlike a lot of the other cards, which I was using the original printing OCG release of it, this is the TCG artwork. Considering that in the OCG, the card is topless. She has Barbie anatomy, so there is no nipples, but I'm not risking naked chest flesh to get this video in trouble. Oh, and if you were watching the uncensored Japanese version of the anime, now she's getting all of it covered up by her hair when she was used. Also, her hairband has been changed to her hair color rather than blue. Maybe since she got a blue scale top, that it would be a little too much blue, so they made a decision to give a little color difference. But in the OCG, we get some more fan service alongside a 1400 beater. Not bad for a Volume 4 Seal Duel. And we get into with cards that may get this video demonetized if I actually was making money off of this. Okay, it's not a fully naked woman or maybe just a topless woman. It's a cat fairy and a thong that got turned into hot pants. Up to you decide which one you prefer overall. But yeah, cat girl whose main attack is scratching away at enemies. But it sadly has the power of a cat. A little annoying, and maybe it does do some damage. But it's going to, not bug you after a while. But at that, we get a little break from the sexy monsters. Unless you find a robot really nice, but ground attacker Bugroff. Another one of the stronger monsters from this set that you can just summon without tribute. It is not just a ground attack robot, it also used to be a sea weapon. What could they be setting up with that flavor text? We're going to see either a past version of it, or maybe new models that return to the sea. We'll have to wait to see what comes out of that. Following from technology to magic is Tao the Chanter/Exorcist, the master of yin and yang, handling them in delicate balance to use spells and counter spells. Who takes it hard with having the yin and yang symbol for a face, his mask having two large yin yang balls on them, and man, those arms do not look great. They look like they could easily be broken, which is weird because if you look at the card artwork in the Game Boy games, yeah, it's not a bodybuilder, but it still looks a whole lot better than the guy in the actual art, and jeez, that bending. Yeah, I guess if you really care, that 400 attack point monster. Moving on. The Ogre King of the Black Shadow is not really a king in shadow, rather he's an Ogre King possessed by some spirit that charges against its opponents. Not much to say, it has plenty of that standard. It is very much another standard monster for this set with a in-between 1500 and 1000 attack point stat, though it's slightly better defense at 1400 if you didn't have the other monsters at this point. But it is a striking card with that dark creature maybe portraying to run you down, and with that shadow behind him looking down menacingly. It's still interesting comparing late 90s Yu-Gi-Oh! Versus a card game today. Kind of like how the same way you compare JoJo to how it started to how it is now. Another effect monster with a okay effect. The Stealer Iron Scorpion has, when a non-machine monster attacks this card, is destroyed at the end phase of your opponent's second turn after this card is attacked. If its measly stats, it basically is dead from getting blown. It's basically dead just from getting blown on by any monster at this point. But it does leave an opponent's monster in a tight spot when it's hit. Then they have 2 turns to figure out what to do with the monster they used. If it was already a particularly powerful monster, do they just let it die out and use its attack for as whatever they can? Or, no tribute off for something else. Granted, if you are almost dead, letting your opponent's strongest monster still live for a few more turns is not great. And against any machines, I really don't know what kind of machines we are talking about here because, well, there's a decently strong machine, but it's like, are you really going to use a singular... Well, there is one machine in the next set that might be worthwhile, but who's really running a fully machine deck to counter Iron Scorpion? Actually, it just has one eye, not eyes. Can you believe a children's game card is willing to overlook such an important detail? Unbelievable. But then again, in the OCG, the card's called Angel's Ears, monitoring the surrounding with its terrifying appearance that could make a baby cry at the sight of him. But probably more crying that this was a tribute monster for stats like that with, Yeah, it's kind of a problem with a lot of the single tributes right now. It's just like, we've peaked. There's no reason to use anything besides Summon Skull and maybe Curse of Dragons if you're wanting to have a few more monsters. I guess maybe if your Summon Skull that you got was not through Battle City rules, it might be an issue, but You know, this is striking enough that you would give it a few looks before moving on to the other monsters. Okay, what is with this set and water monsters getting me concerned about strikes? Or any issues with the algorithm? I guess it does have a swimsuit here rather than just being fully nude, so I guess I can live with that. This is the rather blandly named Water Girl, a monster that shoots water that transforms into ice arrows before hitting their opponents. Aside from its slightly odd stat line, it's as forgettable as her name. Like, not even just Siren. Calling her Water Girl feels like they just needed to name the last of the hot water monsters that this set had inside of it. Moving on to an actually okay monster for this set, Ancient Elf has lived for 1,000 years and leads spirits into battle against foes. Though probably more noteworthy about this card is the potential error in the text. The TCG claims that the Ancient Elf is a he, but when the card appeared for a rather brief time, it was voiced by a woman. And even the art itself seems to point more towards that. Though, to be fair, in the card's defense, in the OCG, it's a lot more androgynous with the use of the they noun. Maybe it was the case with the translators, saw the more neutral writing and just took it that way. But anyway, 1450 is just slightly below the top stat line of the set, and it's perfectly fine with Yamini. Forever embarrassing Domo, since an elf can make better use of the power of darkness than him. Oh yay, I was just wondering where the fusion monsters were to add to my deck that I will never use at all. Thank you for answering my prayer, Deep Sea Shark. Yes, both materials are in this set, so I guess it's fine, but spoiler, a 1900 beer that can be easily summoned is coming up next set. Hint, hint. I guess you can take solace in knowing that it has the shortest text of any OCG card at only 5 characters, so good for it. It gets even more embarrassing when you learn that one of the parts to make this shark is considered a god. In the OCG, he is a godfish, where his English name makes him more a bottom dweller. Though he is probably a lesser god based on its attack, his wrath is more a few smacks rather than hurricanes and tsunamis. Though the kanji for god can also be read as deep, so sure, this is making sense for why they went that way. They say that he who rules with his left rules the world. Sadly, Destroyer Golem's enhanced arm is on his right side of the body, so that does not count for him. But doesn't stop him packing a devastating punch against his opponents, whether obliterating with a punch or by crushing them with his arm. The other major normal summon that was worth. Another decent normal summon in this set nicely fits into any deck going for all the best normal summons. Even if it's going to be a little harder to use 1500s in a bit. Next up is 4, or a close approximation without calling him that. Normally he goes by the name Kamakari Attack or Thunder God's Wrath. A fusion between, of all things, Akyu Beam and a later card we have not talked about, Mega Thunderball. Which tells me they were just reaching into a hat to be like, okay, which is going to be the specific requirement for this monster? Well, we have this weird angel monster creature, then we have a ball. Yep, makes perfect sense. It's a shame that a certain other monster was not out yet, because I feel it would have made more sense. Instead, it is stuck as being the only level 5 Thunder monster. So, hey, guess it does have something going for it, and can also join Flower World for a rather useless prize. Ugh, we're really back in the fusions, aren't we? This is really testing me. Especially with the name Practical. It's not the name of some unknown type of dinosaur like you may think. Rather, it's a portmanteau of pragmatic and practical. Two things that this dino-snake hybrid is definitely not. 1900 for a free card combo, even in 1990, was just not cutting at this point. And even if it was cool to get off, it was going to be a rarity with how everyone would have to go your way. And sure, the method of fusion from earlier games was just going to be impossible to work with. Why not just make these cards at least generic, like one dragon, one dino, and one snake? It would increase the playability of most of these fusions and not just be gimmicky garbage. Behold, a new evolution in the world of plants. The first player-gun hybrid. Barrel Lily is sort of a pun, called a Tepo Yuri. It's a reference to a scientific name for the Easter lily, but that it is a gun lily or a magnum. It doesn't use silly bullets to attack, it attacks with the most dangerous weapon of all. Pollen. Look, given a choice between a bullet in the arm or other organs around me, or a stuffy nose, watery eyes, and poor pain, give me the bullet. I would rather take that than allergies. Morphinan would be arguably one of the least impressive monsters and quickly forgotten. And for a stat so low for a tribute, it's also kind of hilarious for this weird, bizarre shark demon. 1550. At a time when we had 1600 normal summons and before Booster 4 with 1300 defense. It would have fallen into obscurity if it had not been for OCG players turning it into a joke. Because despite its pitiful stats, it cannot technically be grabbed by any of the possible recruiters that could grab him later on when they were released. Only one of them could bring it to your hand, and that was it. Just add it, not summon it so you could either summon the 1600 beater you just got, or this little abomination. He's the meme vote that pops up and gets prizes just for how pathetic he is. Though, can't really hate the game. If that's how he's going to be remembered, let him do that. Probably got to be better remembered than Caterpillar, spelled with a K in the TCG, because being litter is cool now, I guess. I also have to love how we went from cutesy in the games to weirdly grotesque in the real version. The veins around this party. I get we are viewing the little guy up close so he doesn't look as cute because when you get all those details, but ugh. Our sacrifice to the one monster who has to be the worst that's imaginable at the time or this was more a joke to get in your pack. Before we got the different dimension heroes, we had the D-Human. D in this case stood for Drago. I was about to say it looked more elfish, but on closer inspection it could be the crown is like how Sun Dragons had like the horn on its upper mouth and the ears look more draconic. But that sword made from a dragon's fang, yeah, no, that's a spear. Dueling shows just how huge that thing is, and even in Forbidden Memory, yeah, that's a spear, and it must have been akin to a lesser dragon since the guy only has 1300 attack. Yeah, sadly not the fang from my Blue Eyes White Dragon, so it does not have that kind of power. Whenever there's a person who more or less is out there being like, oh, the card art was so much cooler back in the days with all these dragons, magicians, dinos, remind them that by the 4th volume we were already using inanimate objects for monsters, which just rolls on the ground. Which has also got to be a bit of a pain in the ass since it has all those spikes on it. It has to be struggling to roll at certain points. This set really has just been slight highs and a few lows. Unless you really want to make Kaminari attack, you were not playing this thing at all. What that tongue you'll be doing? Well, this tonguefish grabs up a whole bunch of the other fishes and sucks the energy out through the tongue. You're saying that out loud can sound wrong, depending on when you come in here. Must be why it has the extra 50 attack points because he's sucking up those fishes. Sadly, he's derping up quite a bit, so he is on some of that good fish that might be making him screwy. The forgotten sibling of Arabi. He so desperately wants to be Arabi, he even copied his artwork from the manga. The Tracheodon is a speedy tiger-striped dragon? Alright, who the hell fell asleep writing? The monster type is dinosaur. It's right there. It's a recolor of Arabi. How the hell do you end up making this kind of mistake like this? Anyway, he's racing across the wasteland, just chasing after his rubber shadow because sadly he cannot be an Arabi. I'd much rather have had it closer to a Trachodon. Well, with that duck bill, that would have been a lot more funny than what we got here. And look at him. This could have been a funnier monster if we got this. Before there was the Mirage, but now we have the Absoluter. A bird that is pulling its foes deep into his mirror realm where you are powerless. A monster that is an all-rounder. 1300 attack, 1400 defense may not have been the highest in either aspect, but maybe in a pinch it could be good. Unfortunately, all-rounders are just not going to do it in a world of extreme highs, so, eh. Look, it's not a droll bird this time. He is the Great Bill. I guess you can consider this a stronger version of droll bird because he is stronger by a far margin. Nothing that is outstanding, but it is quite impressive what it could put in its mouth. The fat little chunker must be able to unhinge his jaw because he does not seem like he would be able to do so. After absorbing even more electricity than it likely could, Thunder Kid has evolved into Electric Lizard, and it has also gained an effect, effectively stunning any non-zombie monsters from attacking its next turn. Electric Lizard has some potential. It could save off an attack and remove some of the bleeding, or if your opponent really decided not to attack with their most powerful monster to potentially push for lethal. Of course, the opponent could have a way to replace that monster if you didn't hit a boss monster. It also does kind of play on the fact that there is a chance that they have an additional monster to potentially get damage back on board by replacing the old monster or something to make up the difference. Especially with other outright faster ways to eliminate monsters that could be in the deck. Before there was Spider-Man, but now we have the Hunter, eating all that falls into its web, which you would think it would have higher defense preparing itself before monster attack, but it is, well, a Hunter. A 1600 attack monster, which we've already gone over this. We already have 1600 attack monsters that don't require tribute, and we have in a set a monster that is much better than this 1600 attack tribute. Ugh, more effect monsters cannot come soon enough to give some more attempts at analysis than this. Next up is the ruler of the world before man, the ancient lizard warrior, whose ancient lizard brain and wolverine claws destroyed all that dared to fight its supremacy. Sadly, he's now in the modern world, where its supremacy was challenged by a shark, a magical doll, and a woman with a large sword, and the time of the lizard has come to an end. And with Booster 4 on the horizon, the lizards will sadly continue to exist at the bottom of the food chain. Man, we've had sort of a trilogy of monsters that we've been getting recolors. Kumatoko, Stone Armadillo, and now the ancient tree of enlightenment has become a Trent. No, I didn't misspell it. It's not Treant, it's Trent. Now not using his big tree brain to avoid all danger, he is now a guardian of the woods who is immortal. Immortal. Can we have not gotten like an effect like it cannot be destroyed by battles like once per turn, or you have to use fire monsters to defeat it? Like, maybe give that card text actually some meaning instead of just being a slightly below average tribute defender. Which, yeah, there's really not many good tribute defenders because you're mostly just setting up for later. And as we close out Volume 4's monsters, let's go back to the basics. Talking about a truly awful monster in Flame Viper. Nothing beats going back to the days of small attack points and small defense points, and its fast and avoid plentiful attacks. Mouse amongst lions. He doesn't even realize it. Aside from Elegant Egotist, the spells of the set follow a similar theme. Targeted Destruction, Warrior Elimination, Acid Storm, my favorite, Insecticide of the Spike Gods. How do you know it belongs to a god? Well, the person holding it has God tattooed on their hand. Breath of God and Eternal Drought would target specific types of monsters for destruction. Warrior Elimination destroys... well, it's pretty obvious what it destroys, based on the card artwork, and despite its crosshair was not censored at all. Acid Storm destroy machines, Insecticide for insects, Breath for rocks, and Drought for fish types. These cards have, a lot of problems. Obviously, the fact that most value you were going to get out of these were if you were targeting a deck that focused around a specific type of monster. Meaning if your opponent did not have a card that met those criteria to be destroyed, it was effectively a dead draw. It's easy to see this as something of like, hey, this is what you put in your side deck. That 15 card deck that you were able to swap in cards for your best 2 out of freeze. Like, say your opponent has a lot of warrior monsters. Then you could swap in warrior elimination to use for that if, not every starter deck had Drageki, or people got access to Dark Hole or Fisher. These cards would make more sense in, like, a first volume, but Volume 4, there's plenty of ways to store monsters that is not as specific. Yeah, not the greatest end of Volume 4. It was a set that did have some key cards to power up your deck, or to patch up for stat lines for certain monsters, but it definitely had that feeling of the fourth time around is not as good as Part 3, 2, or 1. Moving on to sort of like the in-between major core sets, we have the Jump Festa 1999 promotional cards that happened between July 30th and August 3rd, 1999. Distributed to people attending the event was a secret rare Blue Eyes White Dragon. Probably the first example of a different rarity for a card, and trust me, it was not going to be the last one for Blue Eyes. Oh, trust me, there's going to be a lot more rarity reprints. After that, on August 5th, we have the Dark Duel Stories game guide that came with the leftover in the Forbidden One. So if you're keeping track, you got the RNs from the game guides for Dark Duel Stories, and the legs came in the booster sets. It's kind of a neat way to pair them together like that, but we are of course on the precipice of the last piece being released very soon. Next up was the Valuable Book number 1, a book that covered the 450 cards released through Booster 1 and 4 and Volume 1 and 4. 451 cards. We have a long way to go. A long way. Was not just the OG card compendium. The Value Book came with promo cards that would add a new mechanic to Yu-Gi-Oh! Ritual. And the first ritual is Dokuru/Skull Rider. Actually a design for a monster Takahashi had made but was never included in the manga. Now, rituals... well, somehow they were even worse than Fusion. Because they were not Fusion cards, so they couldn't go in the Fusion deck. Remember, it wasn't the extra deck initially until they introduced Synchros. So they had to go in the main monster deck, so you had to draw them. But not only did you have to draw them, you had to draw their exclusive ritual spells. In Dokuro Rider's case, it was Revival of Dokuro Rider. Generally, most ritual spells will have the effect of tribute a monster or monsters at level is or greater than the stars on the card. So on one hand, rituals were less restricted than fusions, since you could tribute any monsters. On the other hand, the payoff was still garbage. You're telling me that in order to tribute for this card, I needed another spell card or that's exclusive to this specific card, and if I don't have said card, it is a brick until I can get it. Sure, you can use cards from hand for tribute, but this was the card they wanted to premiere the new Sun mechanic. Sure, it's nice to get new material from Kazuki Takahashi, but rituals were basically just that. Slightly more complicated tribute monsters. Of course, rituals would get their time in the sun at certain points, even being the best deck of the format and even tier 0, but often they played against the rules of rituals or just cheated out monsters. Add on to that the ridiculous amount of generic support cards, it's easy to see why they became the best decks. Heck, even as of recently, Ritual has been back in meta contention with Mitsurugi. I cannot wait for this video to be aged poorly because Mitsurugi is not the best deck. Maybe I'll cut that. It's been limited or nerfed to heck. But that brings us to August 26, 1999, and the release of one of the biggest jumps in power for the OCG Series 1, Booster 4.